Some children learn something painfully early, that nobody is coming. Not when they're overwhelmed, not when they're scared, not even when they quietly break inside their own room. So they stop asking for help. And years later, people admire them for being independent. But what if that independence was never freedom? What if it was survival? What if the strongest people you know are actually the loneliest? There's a certain type of person who never wants to burden anyone. They say things like, "I'll handle it myself. It's fine. Don't worry about me." Even when they're drowning. Especially when they're drowning. Maybe you know someone like that. Or maybe you became that person without even realizing it. Because hyper-independent people rarely look broken. They look capable, calm, reliable, emotionally controlled. But behind that version of themselves is usually a child who learned one dangerous lesson. Depending on people hurts. Imagine a little kid sitting in a living room after a terrible day at school. Maybe they got bullied. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they just needed comfort. But when they tried to talk about it, their parents were too busy, too angry, too emotionally unavailable. Or worse, they were told, "You're too sensitive. Stop crying. Deal with it." So the child slowly begins to understand something. Their pain is inconvenient. And children adapt fast, faster than people realize. Some children become loud to survive. Others become invisible. And some become emotionally self-sufficient far too early. They stop needing comfort, at least on the surface. They learn how to calm themselves down alone, how to hide emotions, how to solve problems without help. And everyone around them starts praising them for it. "You're so mature for your age." But sometimes, mature was just another word for emotionally abandoned. Pause for a second. Think about the people who say, "I don't need anyone." Were they truly born independent? Or were they simply disappointed too many times? Because real independence is healthy. Hyper-independence is different. Healthy independence says, "I can handle things." Hyper-independence says, "I can only rely on myself." That difference changes everything. A hyper-independent person struggles to ask for help even when they desperately need it. Not because they're arrogant, but because somewhere deep inside, asking feels unsafe. Unsafe because they remember what it felt like to be ignored, or misunderstood, or emotionally rejected. And this doesn't only happen in childhood homes filled with obvious trauma. Sometimes it happens in quiet homes. Homes where food was provided. Bills were paid. Everything looked normal from the outside. But emotionally, nobody was really there. No deep conversations. No comfort. No emotional safety. Just silence. And emotional neglect is dangerous because it's invisible. A child can survive without affection. But they don't come out untouched. They grow up believing their emotions are too much for people. So they become less emotional, less needy, less vulnerable, until one day, they don't know how to let anyone close anymore. You can see this in relationships all the time. Someone finally enters their life and genuinely cares about them. But instead of feeling safe, they feel uncomfortable. They overthink kindness, distrust consistency, pull away when someone gets too close. Not because they don't want love, but because love feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things feel dangerous to the nervous system. That's why some hyper-independent people secretly crave connection more than anyone else. They just don't know how to receive it. They know how to survive alone. But being cared for? That feels terrifying. Because if you spent your childhood solving every emotional problem by yourself, then vulnerability starts feeling like weakness. Even resting feels wrong. Even needing support creates guilt. Have you ever noticed how some people apologize for everything? Even for having emotions? Even for asking tiny favors? That behavior usually didn't appear randomly. It was trained into them, slowly, over years. A child who constantly feels emotionally unsupported begins shrinking themselves to survive. They become easy, low maintenance, the strong one. But deep down, they're exhausted. And the saddest part? Most people never notice, because hyper-independent people are experts at hiding pain. They go through heartbreak quietly, stress quietly, loneliness quietly. They disappear for days while fighting battles nobody sees, then return acting normal. And people assume they're okay because they always seem okay. But strength can become a prison, especially when your entire identity is built around never needing anyone. There's another painful truth people rarely talk about. Hyper-independent adults often struggle with receiving, not giving, receiving help, receiving love, receiving care, receiving softness, because deep inside, they feel more comfortable earning love than simply being loved. So they become the helper, the listener, the reliable one. But when they need someone, they go silent. And sometimes, they secretly wish someone would notice without being told. Because as children, many of them had needs nobody noticed. So now, part of them still waits for someone to finally understand them without explanation. But people cannot heal wounds they cannot see. And eventually, hyperindependence creates emotional distance. Not just from others, from themselves. Some people become so focused on surviving, they lose touch with what they actually feel. They don't know what they need anymore, only what they must do to keep functioning. And that's why burnout hits them differently. Because they don't collapse dramatically. They slowly go numb. They lose excitement, connection, energy. Life becomes survival mode. Again, just like childhood. Pause for a moment and ask yourself something honestly. When was the last time you allowed yourself to fully lean on someone? Not perform strength. Not pretend you're okay. Actually lean on someone. For many hyper-independent people, that question feels uncomfortable. Because trust was never taught emotionally. Only survival was. But here's the realization that changes everything. The child who learned to survive alone deserves rest now. They deserve softness now. And healing doesn't mean becoming dependent on people. It means finally realizing that needing support does not make you weak. It makes you human. The strongest people are not the ones who never need anyone. The strongest people are the ones who slowly learn that connection is safe again. That vulnerability is not humiliation. That asking for help is not failure. And maybe that's the hardest lesson lonely children must learn as adults. That they were never supposed to carry life completely alone. Not back then. Not now. So if you've spent years convincing yourself that you don't need anyone, maybe ask yourself one final question. Did you become independent because you were strong? Or because nobody ever made you feel safe enough to depend on them? Because sometimes, the people who act like they need nobody are the people who needed somebody the most.